The boardroom went dead silent the moment she stepped inside. A 16-year-old black teen with a faded backpack, standing in front of 11 white executives in tailored suits, and a billionaire CEO who looked like he owned the air everyone breathed. She didn't blink. She didn't shake. She just looked straight at the man at the head of the table and said, in a steady voice, "My name is Aaliyah Carter, and I'm here to claim my father's company." Ryan Whitmore, the CEO with a polished smile and country club confidence, burst out laughing so loudly the chandelier trembled. Not a polite laugh. A laugh dripping with racism, entitlement, and the kind of arrogance only old money teaches. "Sweetheart," he said, wiping tears from laughing too hard, "you shouldn't even be on this floor. If this already made your blood boil, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss stories where justice finally wins." Aaliyah didn't flinch. The security guard near the glass wall placed a hand on his belt, watching her like she was trespassing instead of telling the truth. Executives exchanged looks, the kind that say, "This girl doesn't belong here," without ever saying the words aloud. Ryan stood up slowly, adjusting his cufflinks, towering above her like he'd already won. "All right," he said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Let's hear what you think we owe you." Aaliyah took one quiet step forward. Just one. An entire room stiffened. "Half," she said calmly. "My father's half." The smirk on Ryan's face twitched, just a little. Enough for every man sitting there to feel a shift they couldn't explain. He leaned closer. "Your father?" His tone sharpened. "And who exactly do you think that was?" Aaliyah reached into her backpack. The room tensed. Security leaned forward. Ryan raised an eyebrow. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out something far more dangerous. A thin, sealed envelope, edges worn, ink faded, but powerful enough to ruin every man in that room. "You knew him," she said quietly, "better than anyone else." Ryan's jaw locked, but he kept a fake smile. "And what makes you think," he asked slowly, "you have any right to stand in this room?" Aaliyah didn't bow her head, didn't stutter, didn't break. She simply said, "Because everything you built on a lie." Aaliyah's fingers brushed the edge of that worn envelope, but she didn't open it yet. Instead, a softer expression flickered across her face. One no one in the room understood, because in that split second, she wasn't in the boardroom anymore. She was standing in her tiny bedroom. The night she found a letter that changed her entire life. If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe. She'd been cleaning out her mother's old dresser, searching for a photo she needed for a school project. But the back panel had come loose. Behind it, hidden for more than a decade, was a sealed envelope addressed to my daughter, Aaliyah. Open when you're ready. The handwriting made her breath hitch. Her mother had passed when she was 9. She remembered the softness of her voice, not her secrets. That night, Aaliyah sat under the fading yellow light in her room, hands shaking as she opened the letter. Inside was a confession, so heavy it felt like it could split her world in half. Her mother wrote about a man she loved, a man from a different world, a man with power, money, and a family legacy he never wanted the public to know he had stained. She wrote about threats, pressure, silence forced through fear, and one line that burned itself into Aaliyah's mind forever. Your father wanted to claim you, but they told him if he did, he'd lose everything. Underneath the letter, taped neatly, was a second envelope. Proof for when she's old enough to fight back. Aaliyah spent 3 months gathering courage before she opened that second envelope. Inside were documents she didn't understand at first, signatures, dates, fragments of a story bigger than her small world. But one thing was crystal clear. Ryan Whitmore's family had buried the truth, and someone had died trying to protect it. Back in the boardroom, Ryan kept smiling that dead corporate smile, the one wealthy white men use when they're trying to hide fear behind charm. "So," he said, lowering himself back into his chair, "you found some old papers in your mother's dresser, and now you think you're royalty?" Executives chuckled under their breath. The security guard smirked. But Aaliyah wasn't the same girl she had been when she found that letter. She wasn't timid. She wasn't scared. She looked Ryan straight in the eyes, her voice steady. "I think you already know exactly who I am." Her calmness wasn't weakness. It was a warning, because Aaliyah wasn't alone. She hadn't come unprepared. And the next thing she revealed would make every man in that room wish they had listened the first time. Aaliyah didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't explain herself. She simply reached into her backpack again, slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room followed her hand, and when she placed a thick, sealed folder on the table, the kind used for legal evidence, the color drained from two executives' faces instantly, because they recognized it. If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from the US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters. Ryan tried to laugh, but it sounded thinner this time, cracked around the edges. "What's this supposed to be?" he scoffed. "Your report card?" Aaliyah didn't blink. "You tell me." She slid the folder toward him with 2 fingers. The room went so quiet the air conditioner's hum felt deafening. Ryan opened the folder lazily at first, mocking her, until he saw the first page. His smirk didn't just fade, it collapsed, because staring back at him were 3 documents he had hoped never to see again. A certified DNA test, a copy of a birth certificate with one name blacked out, a notarized statement dated 16 years ago. Ryan's throat tightened. The CFO, an older man with silver-framed glasses, whispered under his breath, "Impossible, she's just a kid." Aaliyah spoke before Ryan could. "That DNA test was done last year. Independent lab. Chain of custody verified." Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical. The kind used by people who already know the truth. Ryan shut the folder abruptly. "This proves nothing," he snapped. "Anyone can forge paperwork. Anyone can then call the lab." Aaliyah interrupted. "Right now, they keep records." Executives glanced at each other, discomfort rising like heat. Ryan stood, pushing the folder away as if it were poison. "Even if these documents were real," he said, voice shaking just slightly, "what makes you think a minor can walk in here and demand anything?" Aaliyah leaned forward. "Because my father didn't just leave DNA behind." She tapped the table once. "He left evidence." A pin could have dropped in that room and echoed. She reached into her backpack one more time, slow enough for panic to ripple across every face. "No," Ryan muttered. "Don't tell me you." Aaliyah placed a flash drive on the table, a small, silver one. Plain, almost harmless looking. But Ryan reacted like it was a loaded weapon pointed at his chest. "You know what's on this," she said quietly. "You've always known." Ryan stumbled back a step, a real step, and for the first time, the executive saw fear in him. Real fear, because Aaliyah hadn't come to scare them. She'd come to bury the lie they'd built their empire on. And the next person who walked through that door would make sure no one escaped it. Ryan hadn't even recovered from seeing the flash drive when Aaliyah said something that made every executive freeze mid-breath. "I didn't come here alone. There's someone else, someone who knows everything you tried to bury." The room stiffened. The kind of stiffness that happens when guilt suddenly grows a spine. If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe. Before Ryan could speak, the door behind Aaliyah opened, and in walked a black woman in her mid-40s, confident, graceful, and dressed in a charcoal business suit that screamed experience and authority. She carried a leather briefcase and moved like someone who owned every space she entered. Ryan's face went pale, completely pale. "Margaret Collins," he whispered. Executives gasped under their breath. The CFO muttered, "No, she left years ago, she can't." But she could, and she had. Margaret stepped beside Aaliyah with a calm smile, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder before addressing the room. "Good morning, gentlemen. It's been a long time since I stepped into this building, but I see some things haven't changed, including the lack of diversity in this room." A few men shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's smile never left, but it sharpened. "I worked here for 8 years," she said, directly under Leah's father. Ryan swallowed hard. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't start rewriting history. History doesn't need rewriting, Margaret cut in. It was recorded, just not by you. She set her briefcase on the table. The click of its locks opening sounded like a countdown. I left this company, she said, because I refuse to help cover up what happened the year Aaliyah was born. I refuse to stay quiet about why her father suddenly disappeared from internal records. And I refuse to be part of a racist system that tried to erase his black daughter from existence. Executives stiffened like mannequins. Aaliyah stepped forward. Tell them, she said softly. Margaret nodded and pulled out a binder thicker than Ryan's ego. Aaliyah's father, she began, was forced out of his partnership, threatened, not for incompetence, but because he planned to go public with documentation of discrimination, financial abuse, and the mistreatment of minority employees. Ryan slammed his fist on the table. That's a lie. Margaret didn't even look at him. Really? She asked calmly. Because the emails I printed say otherwise. She flipped to a page and slid it toward the nearest executive. The man's face drained of blood as he read. I remember this, he whispered. This was never supposed to leave the server. Oh, it didn't, Margaret replied. You deleted it. But like most men who think they're untouchable, you forgot IT does backups. Ryan grabbed the binder, flipping through pages with shaking hands. Emails, signatures, directives, warnings. Each one a nail in the coffin he'd built himself. You don't know what you're doing, he snapped. You're risking everything. Margaret smiled faintly. No, Ryan. That's what you did when you tried to destroy a black man's legacy. Aaliyah stepped closer, her voice calm and steady. And you failed. A silence heavier than the building itself settled in the room. Because they all sensed the same thing. This wasn't just evidence. This was a funeral. For the empire they built on lies. Margaret hadn't even closed the binder when Aaliyah took a deep breath and pressed play on something that made every spine in the room snap straight. A crackle, a voice, a long-buried sound pulled from the dead. A man arguing with someone, terrified, angry, whispering. Ryan, if these numbers go public, you're finished. You can't hide this forever. The executives froze. Ryan staggered backward because the voice on the recording was unmistakable. Aaliyah's father. If this already made your blood boil, tap like. And subscribe so you don't miss stories where justice finally wins. Ryan lunged toward the table. Turn that off. That recording is illegal. Margaret stepped between him and Aaliyah with calm, unshakable poise. It's perfectly legal, she said. This state allows recordings when one party is documenting potential fraud. And Thomas was documenting you. Executives stared at Ryan with growing horror. The audio continued. Thomas, I won't let you push me out because I have a black daughter. I'm going to the board. They deserve the truth. A loud bang echoed in the recording. A door slamming. Footsteps. Breathing hard. Then silence. Aaliyah paused the audio. The silence in the room felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Ryan's hand shook, but he tried to regain control. She's manipulating you. This is doctored. No, Aaliyah said quietly. It's backed up by metadata. Time-stamped. Unaltered. Your IT department authenticated it last week. They didn't know who it was for. The CFO's face turned gray. I remember when Thomas disappeared from records. You told us he resigned voluntarily. Margaret locked eyes with him. He didn't resign. She tapped the binder. He was forced out, threatened, and erased because he planned to expose the racial discrimination buried in your payroll system. Ryan snapped. You don't know anything. You're just a kid from the projects. Aaliyah didn't blink. And you're a grown man who built an empire on fear. The HR director swallowed hard. Ryan, did you really threaten him? Tell me this isn't real. Ryan clenched his fists, desperation replacing arrogance. You think you can trust her? Trust them? They're lying. Margaret leaned forward, her voice soft but lethal. Then why? She whispered. Did Thomas call me that same night, begging for help, telling me he was being cornered? Executives shifted away from Ryan like he carried a disease. Aaliyah slowly picked up the flash drive again. This isn't the only recording, she said. There are 8 more. 8. Every face went pale. Ryan looked around the room, trying to find an ally, but every man was backing away, distancing themselves from him like he was a sinking ship. Because he was. "You can't prove anything," he screamed. Aaliyah met his rage with calm. "I already have." Ryan lunged toward her again, but before he could take a single step, a sharp knock hit the boardroom door. Not gentle, not accidental, a knock with authority. Executives flinched. Margaret straightened. And Ryan? He froze completely, because he knew exactly who knocked like that. And they weren't here for a meeting. The knock hit the door again, harder this time, and the executives jumped like they'd been caught stealing. But Aaliyah didn't look scared. Instead, she gently tapped the small device clipped to her backpack strap. A tiny red light blinked. Once, twice, then glowed solid. And every man in that room felt their stomach drop. If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from the US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters. Ryan's eyes widened. What did you just activate? He demanded, voice cracking. Turn that off. Turn it off. Aaliyah didn't move. That, she said calmly, is the reason you're not walking out of this building today. Before he could respond, the door swung open with force. 3 federal agents stepped inside, badges out, expressions sharp. Behind them, 2 local detectives entered with sealed folders in hand. The lead agent spoke first. "Ryan Whitmore," she said, voice steady as steel. "We have federal warrants for your arrest, including charges of financial fraud, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice." Chaos erupted instantly. The CFO gasped. One executive grabbed the edge of the table. The HR director whispered, "Oh, God! Oh, God!" Ryan stumbled backward, pointing at Aaliyah like a drowning man reaching for air. "She set this up. She's lying. She's manipulating everyone." Aaliyah pressed a button on her phone. The screen lit up, showing a live broadcast feed. 52,000 people watching. Comments flooding so fast they blurred. Screenshots racing across the chat. Ryan's mouth fell open. The lead agent turned her gaze toward him. "You've been live for the past 37 minutes, she said. "Every word you and your team said is now public record." Executives clutched their heads in horror. One sank into his chair, whispering, "My family, my job, everything." Ryan lunged for the phone, but 2 officers pinned him down effortlessly. "This is illegal," he shouted, voice cracking under panic. "You can't live stream a federal investigation." "You weren't being investigated when the stream started," the agent replied. "You were confessing." Aaliyah stepped closer, her tone calm, almost gentle. "My father tried to expose you. He tried to save the company from your corruption. You destroyed his name. You erased his position. And you left my mother to raise me alone." Ryan thrashed helplessly as the cuffs tightened around his wrists. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he screamed. "I'll ruin all of you." You already did," Aaliyah said softly. Detectives lifted Ryan off the floor as he kicked, cursed, and begged. For the first time ever, no one in that room listened, because the truth wasn't in his hands anymore. It was in hers. An entire world had just watched him fall. 6 months later, Aaliyah stood in the same boardroom where she once walked in as a nobody, but this time, the room didn't look the same. The chairs were different, the walls freshly painted, the atmosphere calmer, and the people inside, not a single one of them resembled the old guard who once laughed in her face. She placed her palm on the table, as if grounding herself in the memory of everything that had brought her here. "If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe." Gone were the smug executives. Gone was Ryan's shadow. Gone was every trace of the empire he built on lies. In their place sat a diverse team, Black, Latina, Asian, white. People chosen for competence, not connections. People who respected the legacy that once belonged to her father. Margaret, now the official CEO, stood beside her with a warm smile. "We finalized the numbers," she said. "Profits are up 37. Employee complaints dropped by 80%. And the new mentorship program? already changing lives. Aaliyah nodded, breathing out slowly, letting the reality sink in. She had done it, not through force, not through revenge, but by rebuilding what they tried so hard to destroy. She looked toward the city skyline, the same view her father must have seen countless times, and her chest tightened with a bittersweet ache. "I wish he could see this," she whispered. Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "He sees it, and he'd be proud. You didn't just restore his legacy. Aaliyah, you expanded it." Aaliyah smiled. A real smile, not the brave one she used to hide behind. Downstairs, the community center the company funded was opening its doors. Scholarships for Black youth, legal aid for families facing discrimination, internships for kids from neighborhoods like hers. All born from the truth she refused to let die. As she prepared to speak at the company's rebranding launch, a quiet hush fell over the room. Everyone turned to her, not with doubt, not with pity, but with respect. She opened the folder in her hands, her father's last recorded notes, and felt peace settle over her. "This company once tried to erase me," she began softly, "but now it carries my name." Applause rose around her, and for the first time in her life, Aaliyah felt the weight lift. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been rebuilt. By her,